Yeah, so after the previous little foray into Leibniz on the last video, I thought I ought to just have a little ferret around in the whole Leibnizian philosophy and just get myself clear about what was going on, because if there is some kind of link between the monad thing and the kind of stuff we're seeing, it's probably worth getting a better idea of his philosophy. So I realised that I'd misspoke in the previous one. I said windows in the monads, whereas they're not windows, they're mirrors. But they're kind of mirrors that are internal mirrors, so they're not really mirrors any more than they're windows. I've come up with a kind of analogy that I think kind of helps with all of this, and it's a kind of musical analogy which fits in with his harmony idea. But anyway, let's just read a little bit of Leibniz first to get going. We're looking into like the way in which he says that space, time, causality, and matter are all kind of appearances. They're not substances. They're not substantial reality itself. These are all, in a way, kind of not exactly, but kind of illusions, but they're kind of necessary illusions, if you like, in order for things to be the way that God intends, I guess. So, anyway, let's just start. So, here's Leibniz. I don't really eliminate body, but I reduce it to what it is. For I show that corporeal mass, which is thought to have something over and above simple substances, is not a substance, but a phenomenon resulting, obviously appearance, phenomenon resulting from simple substances, which alone have unity and absolute reality. So these simple substances are his monads. Monads don't possess spatial reality. They don't exist in time. They don't have. There's just infinite numbers of these monads. They are all behind all appearances is the monads, is the realm of the monads, and everything that we take to be material reality, spatial reality, temporal reality, or causal reality is all caused by, well, not caused, it's all a kind of reflection of our relationship with the monads, and we ourselves have a monad that governs us. It's a very, very complicated story, needless to say, what governs the whole thing is a kind of preordained harmony. That God has arranged everything such that all of these monads, which lack causality between one monad and another, are all harmonized in the way that here we go with a musical analogy. So some people compare it to the way that two clocks have been synchronized at the start of creation and continue to keep time. And the idea of causality is that we might see a clock and think that when that clock ticks, it causes the other one to tick at the same rate. And it's not one clock causing another clock to tick. They're just ticking along according to the pre-established synchronization of these clocks at the beginning of creation. So my way of looking at it is to think of it as what is coordinating all of these monads in their harmonious interaction is the kind of, you can kind of liken God's preordained order to a musical score. So all the different musicians are all coordinated with one another through the score, and the score is like their mirror. So the score is akin to the idea of the monad's mirror. So, when the tympanist bangs his drum, that doesn't cause the first violinist to start playing. It's because that's their part that they are to play according to the score that each of them has. And each of them has a particular kind of aspect of the score that is theirs, that is their perspective on the overall sort of symphony or whatever. And so if you think of the musicians as the monads, as a sort of a kind of a analogy for the monads, all the musicians are doing their thing independently of all the others in a sense. The thing that ties the whole thing together into a coherent unity of music is the overall musical score. And so that's I think that's quite a good way of thinking about this idea of the mirrors, or the way that each monad has a perspective on the whole of creation through its own its own kind of inner resources, which would be its understanding of the score, so to speak. So and if we then sort of pursue this musical analogy, we could also think of each act of each musician, like when the tympanist bangs his drum, that carries the weight of what has preceded everything else in the universe. If the universe, we think of the universe as the symphony, so that carries the weight of what has preceded, and is also pregnant with what is to follow. And so that also manages to capture another aspect of what Leibniz thinks about how the monads are. And obviously there's some monads that play a larger role, there's some monads that play a smaller role. One monad might only just bang the triangle once in the whole symphony, but and the main violinist might hog the whole thing, So they all have their part to play. It's all preordained, right? So this comes round to this question of free will and kind of robots, if you like. I mean, so in a sense, the score is the program of each monad, of each musician, and the score is what each musician has to play. There can be no question of them suddenly sort of improvising halfway through. They have to stick to the score. Right? That is their inner purpose, is to unfold this score. They can't choose anything else, because if they do, then it won't be the best of all possible worlds. And the best of all possible worlds is the world that God has created out of all the possible worlds to be the best, most harmonious thing, given all these different elements. So a musician in that sense, playing a symphony, you could argue, well, they don't have free will then. But is that true? I mean, does a musician experience a sense of being kind of dominated by a score? Or do they experience the playing of the score as a realisation of their musicianship? You know, are they like a robot? Or are they experienced in their professional field the highest expression of their free will? Again, I think this idea of harmony, maybe he did have music in mind when he was thinking about all of this, because it does seem to sort of raise, you know, it does kind of raise some interesting questions about what it is he's saying. And obviously you could get robots to play a score. You know, you could get a whole load of robots, you could get them to play the instruments, you could program the score into them, and off they would go. But would that be, you know, why would it be that once we've got robots that can play music, that people would still choose to play music and still choose to play musical instruments? Because they find in the playing of it is the realisation of themselves. And a robot is not realising anything by playing the score, because it's a machine, ultimately. So that, I think, is the point. You know, I mean, to take another analogy, you could have I mean, we now have robots that can definitely play chess, right? There's no doubt about that. Well, I say play chess, but they appear to play chess. So there's two robots, they're playing chess. And so what is the actual game here, though? Really, the game isn't chess anymore. It's the cunning of the programmers in getting their robot to beat the other robot at chess. So that is now the game. The game of chess no longer exists, because a game can only exist between people who understand it as a game. And say the game started, and then there's some apocalypse, everything's wiped out on Earth. Somehow these two robot playing chess things just float off on a little rock into the universe, and they're never to be seen by anyone ever again. And at some point there's a little bing, the game's over, so to speak. The game's over, one robot's won. Well, what's actually happened there? Has a game been won? Or has there just been a physical bing somewhere in the universe that no one can hear either? So yeah, it doesn't seem that that's a real game. You know, it's not a game. And so robots playing music isn't real music by definition, because music is something that realises something in the free will of individual musicians. But getting back to the Leibniz and the music, we now need to understand the sheer complexity of the monad reality, which is the only true substantial reality. There's an infinite number of monads behind every physical thing, because every physical thing is composed of monads. In a sense, every physical thing is composed of every monad in existence, but only some of them play a more prominent part. So every change in a monad is reflected in this internal mirror thing, in the score type thing, in every other monad, but it's not caused. So it's not a causal relationship between the monads. The appearance of causality is purely to do with the preordained harmony between the monads that are behind, say, physical things and physical bodies, and the monads that are behind the mind, or the thinking, or the animate kind of impulses of animals, you know. So when I think to sit down and make this video, I don't actually cause my body to do anything. It's just that my body, in this preordained harmony, does what it does, my mind does what it does, and the two are just synchronized together. And we draw from that the idea of causality. But causality is not a real thing. That's not to say that causal explanations and mechanistic explanations aren't good scientific explanations. As far as I'm aware, Leibniz didn't, criticised Newton for his gravity as occult, as being occult, because there was no mechanism there. Leibniz was in terms of his ideas about how scientific explanations should work, they should work in terms of showing a mechanism. And that mechanism is a description, but not an explanation. So the appearance of causality doesn't explain. The explanation is the preordained harmony. But if you come up with a decent causal explanation of something as a scientist, with a plausible mechanism for its thing, that, according to Leibniz, is preferable to coming up with an explanation or a description that doesn't really have a mechanism. So in that sense, science is still trapped in the realm of phenomena and can't penetrate through to the realm of true substance. But it's what it thinks of its explanations, which are in reality descriptions, can still be true descriptions. They can still correspond to something that exists in the realm of the monads. I think that's how it would work. So yeah, primary reality has no time, no space, no matter, no causality. The realm of phenomena is essentially illusory. Such phenomena are, though, the objects of science. So, yeah, I've covered all of that. Yeah, so essentially that is Leibniz. That is really where we are with Leibniz. And we've got this sort of idea of this infinite complexity of the monads. They act in concert in order that appearances are the way they are. Certain things are the appearance of a governing monad that realizes the composite nature of all the other monads. So you've got a thing like a cup is a simple conglomeration of monads that have been preordained to have this phenomenal appearance of a cup. But there's not a kind of, it doesn't have an animating monad that also governs it. And also the other thing about the musician analogy is that the musician is still moving their arm, or it's not like having written the score, God has to intervene all the time to make things happen. The score is sufficient for the monads to do what the monads do in realising their role in the overall harmonious ensemble. So that's a little point to just bear in mind. So you've got this idea of governing monads as well, and so you have a governing monad that governs the ensemble of monads, which are the physical objects, and then you have governing monads that are like us, say, who govern the animal monads that govern the physical monads. So you've got this sort of hierarchy of monads. Obviously, when I say governing, it's not controlling the other monads, because that would be causality. But some monads play a larger role in the pre-established harmony, as I say, like a chief violinist would, and so on. And I guess the conductor could be seen as causing the musicians, which would be wrong. But if we think of the conductor just being a kind of expression of the score, with a concept of the entire symphony and what all the other musicians are doing, then you can sort of think of the conductor as the monad that would be the human soul that governs the animal monads and all the others. And I say like governs, but don't think of that as causality, So yeah, that's Leibniz for you. So hopefully that's helpful for anyone trying to think about Leibniz, and I haven't confused things too much, or myself. So I'm not going to go on and about anything else at this point, but just I might refer back to this one later on when I look into this other stuff that we're getting into. Okay, thanks.